This is a recording of Cecil E. Frost of 1015 McTavish Way, Palm Harbor, Florida. It was made on December 21st, 1991 by Cecil as a replacement for a tape which he and Helen Early had developed as part of the Oldsmobile History Center oral history program at an earlier time in Florida. Cecil's phone number is 813-784-0777.
My name is Frost, living at 1015 McTavish Way, Palm Harbor, Florida. Telephone 1-813-784-0777. I graduated from Eastern High School in January 1936. During the last month of school, Mr. Chadwick, our class advisor, took me over to Oldsmobile to talk to Carp Julian, representative of General Motors Institute, for the possibility of enrollment in their school and include me in their work program. The next enrollment was not until the fall. At this point, I had been working weekends at my Uncle George's farm. Now I became a full-time farmhand until fall enrollment. One day in the late summer, I went to Oldsmobile and saw Bill Mahoney, personnel supervisor. His last words to me were to come in Monday morning to the small parts department located in the axle plant. I started work for Tommy Hunter, foreman in the steering control arms section, with a guarantee of 50 cents an hour. 4 or 5 men were to finish a specified number of parts to make or better the required hourly rate. After 6 months or so on the control arm line, my foreman, Tommy Hunter, came over and asked me to assist a toolmaker to produce a bracket for the first semi-automatic gear shift to be hung on the steering column. We had about 75 castings to be cut, machined, and finished. This took quite some time because we had to find the right machine and set up jigs to hold the part for each operation. This was fun for me, a new employee, and got me thinking about the tool room operation. My first detail work, this I enjoyed. The union came in 1937. Wages went up. I worked 2 or 3 years altogether in the axle plant. About 1939, I transferred to the crankshaft section, billing 38 and 36A, on a gang drill operation under Jim Hughes foreman. We had to grind our own drills. The best grind gave longer life, less change, and more production. I got good at it. My supervisor was impressed. I moved to main bearings and then to pin grinders. As I became proficient in each operation, my foreman, Jim Hughes, singled me out to join a specialist on crankshaft repair. Scrap crankshafts were piling up, and 2 of us men reworked dozens of welded pieces. We had a special lineup of grinders that, with the right setup, special tools and gauges, we salvaged many crankshafts to production specifications. These are the things that I remember about my machining operations. This group of men were the first to go into specialized war work later. In the 1939-40 period, I discussed going to Lansing Business University with my foreman. He had a man that wanted to stay on days, and I could work nights. This was okayed, and I doubled my awake hours, especially when I worked 10 hours at Oldsmobile and I carried a full schedule at school. Everything went along smoothly, then bang, Pearl Harbor. Car production dropped off, and I went through the paperwork of setting up gun production. My boss in the crankshaft section gave me a chance to come into his office as a clerk full-time during the slowdown. My term at LBU had ended the same week. After 2 or 3 weeks, Jim Hughes, who eventually became superintendent in gun production, obtained a transfer for me to Building 64 to set up purchasing of machine, tools, jigs, gauges, etc. At this point, I worked 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. on car production, and then at 8 a.m. on gun production. War work was 3 8-hour days and 3 12-hour days. Weekly total, 10 hours plus 24 hours plus 36 equaling 70 hours. All new top supervision for guns came into Oldsmobile management from Turnstead Division, general manager, and at least 4 or 5 big supervision names. We set up offices in Building 64, 3rd floor. At first, 3 or 4 of us were required to process general accounting paperwork. Then they added process engineers, product engineers, tool and die designers, etc. I soon went with a group headed by Bob Canby, supervisor, called Machine, Tool, and Records Department. We worked with the process engineers whose job it was to figure out how the pieces were to be machined. After the type of machine was determined, the next step was how many and what manufacture. We in the Machine, Tool, and Records Department eventually had to determine how many machines were required to produce just one part, and then how many to produce 100 and then thousands. Each step of the way required detailed records and much cooperation from all parties concerned. After it was determined how, we expanded personnel-wise and took over the 2nd floor of Building 38 over the main tool room. Plant engineers had to determine what buildings to place the machines in, and above all, right orders needed to be placed to buy equipment. Bill Blackwell was brought out of the main office, Building 60, to head up the purchasing section. He had 2 follow-up men, and I was one of them. We were to get an early delivery just as soon as possible. Promised delivery started as weeks, then soon became months. Follow-up shipment of hundreds of machines, fixtures, tools, and dies became a monstrous task. We at Oldsmobile really worked hard. My glasses went from none to bifocal and then to trifocal. When the guns were no longer needed, we were left with a task of canceling all orders not filled. After deciding if we could still use a small part for auto production. In 1945, at the end of the war, I was transferred to accounts receivable to work under Paul Heberling's supervisor. Oldsmobile was in the process of setting up new dealerships to take the place of those that dropped out during the war. Secondly, they were setting up new zones in areas of new growth. At this time, all dealer parts account statements were posted on 6 bookkeeping machines. Each factory and allied warehouse order was manually posted. It was amazing the number of letters we received from dealers for follow-up of parts not received or billings incorrectly handled. We started with 2 men, which increased to 6 within days. Each day I would get 10 to 15 letters. I would spend maybe 3 hours checking out the requests, then dictate my findings to my secretary up until noon. She would type from lunch on to completion. I would start the procedure all over again with the noon mail. After a couple years, I was transferred to accounts payable. Here, accounts were handled by vendor name. Alphabetical numbers were distributed by volume. It was interesting to observe the number of different kinds of purchases required to build a car. Employees were rated by volume of invoices with the fewest errors in classification. One disagreeable task of the accounting, audit, and cost department was to take inventories of parts out in the plant, divided into main, forge, and warehouse. Following this came container inventories in all plants. Half of this was done on overtime, the money we could use. Our own departmental work piled up. My next step up the ladder was a transfer to the billing department. Paul Heberling was now in charge. I became his assistant. This group of girls hand-billed car invoices. Now I became an authority as to the dollar value of every part on the car and knowledgeable as to every discount involved in the billing operation. Parts installed at the factory as part of dealer net invoices is a set figure and soon became easy to price. It was the oddball price documents that became my task. My next transfer, closely tied to the billing department, was invoice distribution. Parts transferred between warehouses and allied divisions flowed through our girls. Any questionable document was given to me to price and classify. These girls really had a tough job distributing money to different accounts that had to balance across and up and down. At the end of the month, they made journal entries that ended up in general ledger. Their job was further complicated by having accounts payable invoices delivered to them to verify extensions and total amounts. What a job. I always felt sorry for their assignment. A big milestone came into Oldsmobile's future at about this time. Charlie Woodruff had been working with the IBM tabulating group, placing all accounts into the system. He moved from the basement to the audit department. He oversaw all phases from the 3rd floor. They had no need for a lot of the operations I had done over the years. Shortly thereafter, Chad Newman, General Supervisor of Accounting, gave me a chance to enter the Audit Department as a traveling zone auditor. My new supervisor was Mel Hansen. This was in 1964. I went out on my first 1 or 2 audits with Max Bernard. He was going to come into the home office. I took over all the zones east of the Mississippi River. Larry Brown was auditing all zones west of the Mississippi. He worked out of California. After 4 years, Larry Brown did come in to Lansing. I remember my first trip to the west, the Los Angeles zone. In the middle of the winter, we flew over snow all the way and dropped into a valley with beautiful sunshine and green landscape all around. The pilot cut the motors way back and we coasted downhill into Los Angeles. Unbelievable beauty. There were periods when the zone auditor did not work in the zones. One time for 3 months or better, I worked on time and material orders to the outside vendors. Example, design of machines, fixtures, dies, etc. They worked on a time and material basis. It was our job to spot check sizable orders, big dollars. We checked material costs and clock cards at the vendor's place of business. This could be difficult, especially if we were being overbilled. Another item in which the auditor easily made his salary: cancellation of purchase orders at both the beginning and the end of each production year. First, engineering changes after orders were placed required cancellation charges at the beginning of the production. 2, parts on order at close of the production year were more than needed due to reduced requirements. In each of the above instances, we were liable for vendors' costs. This included all raw material, parts in process, and finished parts ready to ship. 1 year on item 2 alone, my detail sheet showed Audit Department saved $265,000. This was the difference between what the vendor requested and what we settled after audit. As a special note, we did check allied divisions that produced interchangeable parts. Errors were found here also. I continued traveling until 1977, when I was asked if I wanted to retire. My answer: give me 1 more year, and under the right conditions, I will retire. It wasn't long before I was given the task of checking Oldsmobile's accounting practices and procedures and Oldsmobile compliance to them. I found some instances where departmental procedures were not as exacting as the master. Some adjustments were required, each way to make complete compliance. Review of the material control and purchasing departments brought back many memories, especially competitive bidding. In no time, my retirement date of November 26, 1978 arrived. Vacation days not taken were soon completed allowing just enough time to travel to our Florida home previous to Christmas. We had spent a couple weeks the previous year making these arrangements. When I retired, Don Wilson, the Assistant Comptroller, stated I had the most seniority of anyone in the financial section at that time. Yes, Oldsmobile has been good to me. Beautiful memories like this will never be forgot. Turn the tape for detail of a more personal nature. Factory, home, and on the road.